US President Donald Trump unveiled sweeping reciprocal tariffs, announcing baseline 10% duties on all imports and much higher rates for some nations. In fact, that entire list is playing out for you. Trump singled out major US partners for imposing trade barriers he deems unfair, with India and the European Union facing 26% and 20% tariffs respectively. In fact, Trump said, "They do it to us and we do it to them." He announced a staggering 34% tariff on goods from China in his Liberation Day speech, railing against foreign cheaters and foreign scavengers. In fact, Trump said the US will charge an import duty of 26% on India and 34% on China. But this announcement represents the largest upheaval in American trade policy in decades. US tariffs will approach levels not seen since the 1930s, as some experts argue. China, by the way, is moving to restrict companies from investing in the US, giving Beijing a bargaining chip in future trade talks with Washington. This is what Bloomberg is reporting as we speak. In terms of the market impact, Donald Trump announced his tariffs shortly after trading ended on Wall Street, and US stocks have already plummeted in after-hours trading. Asian stock markets have plunged as gold reaches record highs. For further clarity from Washington, D.C., let's go across to my colleague Nick Harper, who joins us with the lowdown. Nick, take us through the initial reactions to the sweeping tariffs on ground zero. Many are saying this announcement was complicated and manufacturers are actually scrambling to determine the exact implications for their operations.
Well, that's absolutely right. I think many people have been trying to crunch the numbers over the last few hours, not just to check the veracity of some of those numbers put out by the White House, but also trying to understand what it will mean for each individual country, because it is a complicated list. There is that baseline 10% tariff that's being imposed on any good from any country coming into the United States. But then those reciprocal tariffs on some countries that Donald Trump has targeted, including, as you mentioned, India, who's now facing that 26% tariff because the United States says that India imposes 52% tariffs on US goods entering India. And on top of that, there's 25% tariffs being put on any foreign cars being imported into the United States. So there's plenty to try and grapple with here, but also some suggestions that the numbers that the White House have put together it doesn't quite add up to exactly how much the individual countries actually impose. The reaction has been varied. As you'd imagine, a lot of Republicans are backing the president, but there have been some throughout the course of the day and even in the week ahead of this Liberation Day announcement who have been petitioning the White House to try and cool their jets, to suggest that these type of plans will have major implications, mainly to their constituents who could end up paying higher prices, as you would expect. The Democrats have reacted angrily to much of this. We've heard from Chuck Schumer, the Senate minority leader, saying this is a reckless, inflammatory trade war. A congresswoman from the House, Terry Sewell, saying that this will be the largest tax increase for families in American history. It's bad for consumers, she says. It will mean that prices will skyrocket. We're undoubtedly going to see plenty of reaction from countries over the coming days. Donald Trump's expecting that. He says he will be getting complaints, and he's also expecting that many countries will now be petitioning the White House to try and do some sort of deal to avoid these tariffs. Bear in mind, those reciprocal tariffs are due to start next Wednesday, the 9th of April.
Right, Nick. Also, meanwhile, economists dispute Donald Trump's claim that the US is kind to only levy tariffs on half of what other countries charge the US. In fact, US stock futures also cratered as Trump unveiled these sweeping tariffs.
Yeah, quite incredible. The stock market reaction, I think, is as expected. Stock markets don't like surprise. They don't like change. Something like this, the upheaval it will produce, has meant that the Nikkei in Japan has already dropped 3% as trading opened. We'll see what the Wall Street stock markets do when they open tomorrow morning US time. But already the suggestion is that the Dow Jones will lose about 1,000 points. Meanwhile,
Nick, White House's senior trade advisor Peter Navarro had claimed that Trump's proposed tariffs would actually bring in $6 trillion in revenue over the course of a decade. experts have pointed out that if this is achieved, it would not only be the largest tax increase in US history, but would also triple the tax hike that was enacted back in 1942 to finance World War II. Is this being seen as a realistic goal, this $6 trillion figure as we speak?
Well, there's plenty of numbers that have been thrown around. Another number is 600 billion to 1 trillion in the course of just 2 years. That's the amount that the White House is saying that these tariffs will bring in. But there is some suggestion that won't be the case. If you hark back to the tariffs implemented during the first Trump presidency, the vast majority, about 91% of all the revenue raised from tariffs imposed to China, was then used to bail out American farmers who simply were no longer able to sell their products like soybeans to China. So there is that slight problem, that suggestion that all of this could cause a recession, that it could cause prices to rise, and we could once again see bailouts for a whole range of different industries across the US who simply will find it much harder to sell their products abroad if other countries introduce retaliatory tariffs as a result of what we've seen today from Donald Trump.
Right, and Trump's comments as far as India are concerned, Nick, he said India has been tough on tariffs. He's raised questions about what our modus operandi is. But in terms of the future of Indo-US relations, could this tariff increase escalate tensions between the two nations, or will it prompt more collaboration as far as trade reforms are concerned? Have you been picking up on anything? What are the experts and big business players saying?
It's very difficult to tell. I mean, the suggestion would be that imposing this level of tariff would simply cause problems. It wouldn't solve them. We saw a tremendous friendship between the leaders of the US and Donald Trump and Prime Minister Narendra Modi during his first term in office. The thinking was that that would continue during his second term. But doing this to an ally of the United States, as he has done with other allies and trading partners like South Korea, Japan, imposing much higher tariffs on them than that baseline 10% suggests that they will see problems. There will be rocky times ahead for that relationship between the president and the prime minister. The hope is that perhaps they can get in the room together, they can do some sort of trade deal, they may be able to reduce that imbalance that the US president says is out there. But all of that is really just a vast unknown at this stage. And with that plan to impose a 26% tariff on all Indian goods, the US president is laying down a marker, a very strong marker, a marker that might cause a real rupture in relations between New Delhi and Washington.
In fact, Nick, as we speak, many say that Trump's announcement was awash with insult, as if the rest of the world had looted and scavenged of America, ransacked America. I mean, these would be shocking claims if they had come from any other US president. Yet, today, it's water off a duck's back. Nick Harper, as always, thank you so much for joining us with the latest from Washington, D.C. We've also lined up the crucial takeaways from Trump's tariff announcements. Listen in to the sound bites.
Tariffs give our country protection against those that would do us economic harm. And many people were looking to do us economic harm. Maybe not so obviously, but they were doing tremendous economic harm. But even more importantly, they will give us growth. These tariffs are going to give us growth like you haven't seen before. And it'll be something very special. I think you're going to remember today, it's going to be a free nation that we're dealing with. We're going to have a very free and beautiful nation. It's going to be Liberation Day in America, and it's going to be a day that hopefully you're going to look back in years to come and you're going to say, you know, he was right. This has turned out to be one of the most important days in the history of our country. India, very, very tough, very, very tough. The Prime Minister just left, and he's a great friend of mine, but I said, you're a friend of mine, but you're not treating us right. They charge us 52%. You have to understand, we charge them almost nothing.